Vamos a continuar con la sesión vespertina. Continuamos con el tema Android Market para desarrolladores. Nuestro ponente es Dan Galpin. Sean ustedes bienvenidos. Le damos un aplauso a Dan Galpin, por favor.
All right, so how many of you out there like money? Okay, so that's what this session is about. This session is about how to make money on Android Market. And when we talk about Android Market, what are we talking about? Well, we all know that there are a lot of Android devices out there in the world. In fact, we've heard several times today, there are 135 million compatible Android devices out there, and every single day we're seeing 550,000 new devices get activated. And you want to be able to reach all of them, whether they be tablets or phones. You want to get your application on as many of them as possible. And that means publishing them on Android Market. And when I say compatible, what do I mean? I mean devices that have passed the compatibility test suite. Now, how many of you out there knew that we had a compatibility test suite? Okay, so this is cool. First of all, you can actually go and look at this. You can contribute to it. It's another open source project. It's part of the Android open source project. And any device that has Android Market on it will have passed the compatibility test suite. And that's something we do for the developers to try to maintain compatibility and reduce fragmentation within the Android ecosystem. So when we're talking about Android Market, what do we say? It's an open market. You can publish anytime, as many times as you want. And users have access to your apps right away. And you control all the pricing and distribution. We don't tell you how to price your applications. As long as you follow a couple of simple rules, which are in the terms of service, when you sign up, you can pretty much do what you want. And that's great. That gives you a lot of power to interact with your consumers. And it's easy for developers. It's as simple as going and developing your application using the Android SDK and all of the developer resources we have, and then registering as a developer. You do actually have to create a profile, register, and pay a nominal fee so that we know who you are. Setting up a merchant account if you actually want to sell something. And then publish. It's just as simple as signing and uploading your APK, figuring out what devices you want to be able to go to, and marketing and promoting your application. So the workflow looks kind of like this. We have a whole bunch of assets that we ask you to upload with your application. And there's a good reason for it. Those are the assets that show how your application will appear on Android Market. They're a part of your brand. More importantly, these assets are going to determine whether someone decides to download your application when they go and look at your market page. Because it doesn't matter how cool your application actually is if when they look here, they see a developer that looks like they don't know what they're doing. So make sure your icon looks good. Make sure that your banner looks good. Make sure that you have good screenshots for your application. All of these things are important. And you see these are promotional graphics. Well, if we like your application, and we meaning the whole Android ecosystem team, we'll want to feature it. But if it doesn't have a promotional graphic, or if that graphic doesn't look good, we're going to have to either go back to you, or we're going to have to make a decision about whether we really want to feature the app. So all of this is important. Listing details. Now, if you go to Android Market today, you'll find it's kind of sad. Most of the listings are only in English. Now, of course, I'm speaking to the crowd here, I think, when I say that I want to see everyone list their applications in as many languages as possible. Also, the title and description. All of these things are very, very important to how people see your application. They should be able to quickly figure out from your description what your application does and why they should have it. Type is very important. You can only select one category for your application. So again, this is very important. I want to see it in as many languages as possible. And on the Android market, we actually give a preference to applications that are in the language of the user that is actually searching. So it's important to have those all of these listing details translated. This is an interesting one. So we used to have a feature on Android Market called copy protection. And copy protection meant that on a non-rooted device, you were pretty safe. Your application wasn't going to be copied. It prevented someone from accessing the directory and doing a few other things. The truth is, people root their Android devices. How many people out there have rooted? How many people have Android devices? Let me get a raise of hands. Have any of you rooted your device? Wow, that's like about half, I think. So we realized very quickly that this was not a good solution. Also, you can select the location you want to list in. Very important, don't use copy protection. Copy protection prevents people from installing your application to the SD card, and it generally doesn't really help. Instead, take advantage of our license validation service, which I'll talk about later on. So Android Market is also easy for users. We have the Android Market application itself, the widget, deep links to Market, and a quick search box. These are all ways in which people can interact with Android Market on the device. And that's really important. Because again, we're talking about over 135 million devices that have Android Market pre-installed on them. And these things are constantly changing. We're constantly improving the appearance and the searchability and the functionality of Android Market. So where do users find applications? Well, on the device, we have just recently created a whole bunch of new channels. We've always had a featured section. That's curated by Google and the ecosystem team. We have the just-in channel. We have top paid, top free, and now top grossing. So you can actually see the applications that are making the most money through Android Market. We also have now editor's choice and top developer. I'll go through all these in a little bit of what they mean. Of course, search, banners, deep linking from other applications. And off device, we have market, advertising, websites, all the things you'd expect. And these are important because you can't expect people to just find your application on the device. It is important that it's there. And that is the place that most people go. But make sure that blog sites and that YouTube and all of these places know about your application. And don't worry, we're going to get into some technical stuff here soon. So here's actually probably the first piece of technical information in this presentation. A lot of people say, all right, well, that's great. I have put up a YouTube video, and I have gone and sent stuff to blog sites, and I've created advertising for my application, and I want to know, is it working? How are people finding my application? Well, Android actually has a way of doing that. And you can actually get an intent fired off to your application when it's first run that says, here's where I came from. And as it turns out, Google Analytics for Android automatically will parse this intent and give you information that you can then send back up to your server and do what you'd like with. This URL here actually contains this form, which allows you to generate a URL in the format that Analytics for Android Market wants. So you can find out your campaign source and all of these useful things that allow you to figure out if the time and money and effort that you're putting into a specific promotion makes any sense. So this is something a lot of people don't know. And it's very, very easy to integrate with your application. So ranking in Android Market. We don't talk too much about it, partially because we're constantly changing the way it works. We're constantly changing the signals that are important. We're trying to make sure constantly that the right searches turn into the right application. But there's lots of things that we're interested in. Are the users engaged with the application? Do they uninstall it right away? How are they rating the application? Are users interested? When they go to your page, do they actually download the application? These are all things that lend to themselves to the ranking, to the better placement within Android Market. So ways to improve your ranking. Now, the first one here is so obvious, but I have to mention it. Build a great application. And what does a great application mean? I mean, a great application means that on the handsets that it is targeted for, it runs really well with a beautiful user interface that people find to be intuitive. It matches the Android standards. Definitely market your application. Make it easy to rate and comment the application. You can provide a deep link within your application to Android Market, to your page, to allow people to comment on your application. Provide lots of updates. One of the things a lot of people do, especially larger companies, is they go and they'll make an Android app and they'll put it onto market. And then they won't realize that there's a problem. And it'll sit on market and people will start giving it low reviews. Sometimes even that they've forgotten to do something, like they didn't set the manifest flag to allow it to be installed to the SD card. And they'll get 100 bad reviews saying 1 star, can't install to the SD card. Where a 5-minute update and watching that market listing would have fixed that problem, and they would never have seen all those bad reviews. So it's very important, and I tell everyone when they publish on Android Market to make sure to watch that listing. Not all the feedback you get from your users is necessarily accurate, but a lot of it is good and a lot of it is useful, and it'll help to improve the ranking of your application, and that means more people will download it. And finally, of course, targeting appropriately, whether that means making sure that if your application is designed for a specific location, that it shows up only there, or if you're targeting a specific platform version, that you filter correctly so that only the devices that you know it will run well on get to see the app. Definitely don't launch prematurely. Don't require excessive permissions, especially things like sending SMS messages, things that people know cost them money. That's a great way to make sure that users won't download. And on Android Market, if you actually send a premium SMS message, that is against the term of service, because we don't want users to accidentally be billed for things. So be very careful with those permissions. Also avoid spamming categories. It's a great way to get your app banned, is to put a whole bunch of keywords. For example, your application might be an application that displays girls in swimsuits. There are such applications. But if you spam it and say, this is a basketball application in the keywords, then if the team finds it, they're going to suspend the application. That's not the way you market your app. And of course, be careful with pricing. Do some market research. Speaking of pricing, okay. First of all, how many of you have ever downloaded a paid application off of Android Market? By a show of hands. It's pretty good. How many people have downloaded a free application off of Android Market? Okay. So this doesn't really prove anything, except that users like free stuff. And we know that there are a lot of models that work, even if we know you have to make money off the application. So we know we can't just give away everything. But you have options. You can do free with ads, you can play with affiliate models, or you can go with a freemium model using in-app billing, which we're going to talk about later. And I wouldn't discount paid applications. There are some applications where people want to make sure that the application is high quality, and they're willing to pay for it. Those are mostly business applications. Or they're really fun things like live wallpapers or games. But definitely consider it. Look at what other people in your category are doing and see whether it makes sense. But definitely, freemium makes a lot of sense for a lot of applications. Give the user a taste of the full version. Allow them to buy additional features. Allow them to buy other things within the application. It also allows you to have recurring revenue potentially, which is useful. Because in the paid model, they buy the app once. In the freemium model, they can actually buy it multiple times. So let's talk just a little bit about what featuring and promotion means. Well, there's several different kinds of featuring within Android Market. There is featuring in terms of, this is actually a promoted banner. And that shows up within the app widget that shows up in Android Market on the desktop if the user has it installed. This is, by the way, the new version of Android Market. It hasn't been rolled out internationally yet, but it's going to be rolled out very, very soon. But that's what it looks like. And of course, the web market. Now you can see that on the web market, there's also this additional banner here. That's a separate promotional space. All of that promotional space is actually controlled by the Google team. And you get to that by making an application that hits a bunch of signals. What we look for, of course, obviously a great app, polish, user appeal, any kind of unique Android features. And of course, what do other users think of it? If all of the users hate the application and we love it, there's something wrong. We also look for seasonality. Sometimes it's really cool if it's Christmas time for us to feature an application that's about, Christmas. Or if it's Easter time, sometimes we'll actually look at that, and that will help determine whether we'll feature it. What we don't look for is a port that looks like it really isn't an Android application. If it looks like it came from some other platform, that's a big strike against it, no matter how great the application is. We want to make sure that when an Android user downloads an application, that it feels like an Android application to them, so they know immediately how to use it. So the life of a great app looks something like this. It comes in, it gets into the just-in category. It sits there for maybe 30 seconds. I mean, seriously, the just-in category barely appears. But the developer does some promotion, some viral marketing. And then the application moves into trending. Now, this is a web category. It's very, very fast. Things don't appear very long there. And then it gets into the top new free and paid because it's been awesome. Users are downloading it. They're rating it high. All that other marketing that's been done works. And then it gets into top free, which has got a slightly longer tail than all of these other ones. It's important to have all these different categories to try to make things discoverable. And then finally, we feature it. We feature the application because it's awesome. We recognize the users have spoken, we've seen it, your marketing has worked, and that pushes it even higher up the ranking chain. Then you get categories which are basically based upon other people who are like you, who have viewed or installed the application. It moves there, and then personal recommendations drive it far further. Maybe it gets into top grossing. And then we recognize it as being an editor's choice. This is one of the best applications on Android market, yet another way to feature it. And you do this a couple of times, and you become a top developer. You win the level. So that's what it looks like in a life cycle. But let me get into the technical part of the presentation, which I'm sure some of you have been waiting for. Let's talk about market licensing. Now, I told you we got rid of copy protection on Android market because, in truth, it wasn't working for a lot of people. So piracy is a reality everywhere. We all know pirates. We've seen. How many of you have seen Pirates of the Caribbean out there? The Disney film. Yeah, we've seen it. They can't be stopped. There are people that are going to pirate your application no matter what you do. They've got the eye patch and the parrot and the turkey leg. But we're not really targeting them. We're targeting casual pirates. These are your potential customers. And so what we want to do is make it inconvenient. And we want to maybe even use piracy itself as a marketing tool. And potentially even leverage some new monetization models around things like in-app purchase and ads and other different monetization. So this is what an application might look like today. How many of you have ever seen this happen on your phone? Something like this, where you buy something and you get license check failed. It's not fun. And actually, honestly, this marketing might work on me because I think this is pretty funny. But the reality is if you go and tell your user the app failed right at the beginning, they get no ability to experience the application. There's no motivation for them to go and buy the application later on. Also, this could potentially happen to a legitimate user because the network could be down and they haven't checked in a long period of time. So maybe something a little bit less aggressive might be the way to go. Like, you've spent hours playing my game, so you owe us something. So these are things to think of. Also, if you put up a dialogue like this, it is very, very easy for someone to find where that dialogue is in your source code and remove it. So again, overall, The kind of method of popping a dialog up and kicking the user out of the application doesn't work. So here's what we have for you, the license verification library. It gives a lot of control up to you, just like everything else in Android Market. Your application determines how and how often to enforce the policy. It's very simple. There's a private key that's created that you never see, that's stored up in our license server. And the public key verifies the signature. And it's supported on every reasonable version of Android. So how does this work? Well, it's pretty straightforward. As I said before, the private key sits inside the server. The public key sits inside your application. And you send a license request up. It checks to make sure that the user has purchased it, responds with the key, and then it sends something back to the application. There you go, which then validates the response. And this is great, except for one problem, which is that it can be attacked. People now know how to disassemble code, pull this kind of check out, re-sign the package, and distribute it to everyone. So we've got to be a little sneakier about implementing it. If you implement it just the way the sample does, it's almost as bad as actually not implementing it at all. So what can we do? Yeah, exactly. Tough Android. We can use an obfuscator. And in fact, there's some good samples of it. The current tools directly support obfuscation. And obfuscation is not a bad idea for a lot of applications. One is that it makes it harder for someone to see how your application works in general. If there's anything you don't want people to know about your application, it's a good idea to run this. It also makes it a little bit smaller and slightly faster. So it's not a bad thing to run an obfuscator on any application. We also recommend that you modify the license verification library code, because what we provided was really a sample, and it was never intended for people to just throw into their applications. However, as we've learned, if you provide someone a sample, it doesn't matter how many times you say, please, please modify this. If it works, people will use it. So here's my say, please follow the instructions and modify it if you're going to use it. And of course, we want to make the application tamper resistant. I'll go through a little bit about how to do that. So you can obfuscate the application. You can change the LVL. You can do it by changing the license validation library. You can actually obfuscate better. So you change this, which uses ilicensingservice.class.getName, which is really bad, to actually using the name of the licensing service. And with this, you can actually change the licensing service from the ProGuard config and obfuscate the entire library, which is much better. The other thing you can do, and oh yeah, consider performing a transform on that to make the code less obvious, because obviously they can find that string. So that's obfuscation. It's pretty straightforward. It's very easy. Tamper resistance is a little bit harder, but again, what's kind of cool is that all Android applications sit inside of an APK file, which is a zip file. And they're all signed like a jar file. So you can first see, does the signature match one that I know of? Here we're checking the hash code of the signature. Pretty straightforward. Another thing you might want to do is see if someone's made your application debuggable. Once again, easy to check, easy to change. And then finally, everything is in a zip file, as I said. So every file contains a CRC. Here, in fact, is the way you can check the CRC of the classes.dex file. These are always easy ways to check for tampering. Now, of course, people who crack these titles also are learning how to find these. So the more you can obfuscate it, the best. One way you can do that is by using reflection. So in our previous example, we got the hash of the signature. Using reflection and a little bit of obfuscation, that can look like this. And all I'm doing here is taking the methods that originally referred to get package info. I've base64 encoded them. Not necessarily the best thing to do, because this is still kind of obvious. But at least if they're doing a string search to try to figure out what you're doing, they're not going to find it this way. They're going to have to dig a little deeper. It's going to take them longer. And that's what you're trying to do, is buy time. The other thing, I'm also using reflection to get the classes, so we're not even referring to the package manager anymore. That's another thing that they're going to look for, is that you're actually referring to anything that's trying to do tamper resistance. And the nice thing about tamper resistance is it works everywhere. Whether you're using LVL or not, you can check to make sure your code has been tampered with. And you might want to do that. You might, even if you're not selling your application, you might not want people to be able to modify your application and change its behavior. These are ways you can do that. So pirates can become vampires. And that's much worse. A pirate becomes vampire because an application has a server component. Maybe it's a game that has an asset download. And running an unlicensed title means someone costs you money. But you can stop them with server-side validation. So one of the things that's cool about the way we implemented LVL is, again, it's flexible. Your application actually does the validation of the signature. So it means that it doesn't actually have to happen in your application. It can actually happen on a server. So here's what that would look like. We now put the private key into, the public key into your server. And so then we're going to go and check the license request. And instead of just sending that response down to the application, we actually pass that response to your server. Your server now gets to validate whether the user has purchased the application. And then you can do whatever you want. You can create a session, and that session can be used to send content or use your services. So this is a really easy way to protect yourself from vampires. But you have to worry about something called a replay attack. Replay attack means that the user captures the content of one session and sends it across to many devices. So what we can do is rely on the nonce. A nonce is a number used once in cryptography. So you have two options. You can generate a nonce on your server, but it does add an extra round trip, and then your server can track it. Or you can generate the nonce on the client and let the server store it, send it along with the request. Make sure that license request is never repeated. All right, so we've talked a little bit about license verification. Now we're going to talk about in-app billing. And these topics are actually related. I told you we'd talk about money eventually, right? So here we are, money. So what can you do in in-app billing? Well, in-app billing is meant for virtual goods. If you're selling real goods with an Android market, you're not allowed to use our in-app billing. This is for new tractors in Farmville and for new items within your game of any kind. This is also to upgrade people from the free version to a premium version, or maybe to remove ads from a game or remove ads from an application. But it's not to do things like sell CDs. There are other APIs that people have written to do that. And you can, again, use client-side or server-side validation. Because once again, we don't want people to hack your game or your application to get unlimited virtual goods. So let's talk about managed items. Now, managed items are SKUs in market, like your application. They can only be purchased once. But what's cool is that your application can actually ask the server every once in a while, because there's a very strict limit on how often, to replay all those purchases. And this allows you to fairly easily defeat an application, someone who's trying to spoof your application. But a lot of people want virtual currency. They want unmanaged items. They want people to buy something that can be used up, whether that is just the ability to use your application for a month, all the way down to selling gold that can then be turned into cool stuff or allow you to get through a level faster in a game. But this means your application now has to store everything about the state of that transaction. So it really is great for an application that has a server-side component, but it's a little bit harder for an application that's going to be entirely on the device. That being said, when I talked in my earlier talk that 9 out of the top 10 paid applications in the United States were using in-app billing. And out of those, 2 of them don't have a server-side component. So it's definitely possible to be successful without it. But it's something to note. It takes a little bit more work if you want to protect yourself. And this looks a lot like license validation. once again, private key on the server, public key within your application. You send a billing request up to the server, and it sends back down that response signed with the private key. Your application verifies it. Pretty straightforward. If you could do the server-side version, it looks a lot like the server-side version of LVL. We're seeing a bunch of patterns here, right? We go up, we send the request down, it goes to your application. And then, notice I do add credentials here. And I throw that in because it's even easier to do a replay attack here. So it helps if you have something else to identify the user, to make sure that the people aren't going to be able to take this and use this across different accounts. So once again, your application then can use that token to deliver whatever it wants, very similar to the model with license validation. So we look at the flow of what actually happens in this. We got a purchase request. Your application gets a response code that contains this purchase intent with a request ID. Your application then invokes this start intent sender. And then what's different about this compared to license validation is actually there's a piece of the Android market user interface that shows up in the application, displays the checkout UI. And that's partially so that the user knows that they're not getting billed by some random person who might be stealing their credit card. They know that if anyone's going to steal their credit card, it's going to be Google, which is good, right? And it pauses their application. And then when it comes back, resumes the application when the UI goes away, and gives a result code. We're not done yet, though. Then the application says, all right, so what just got purchased? It then sends back the response code with the request ID. And this is where stuff kind of gets important. The purchase state changes, and then the application confirms the notification. And if the application doesn't confirm the notification, the market is going to continue to pound the application with requests saying, this user bought something, this user bought something, this user bought something, again and again. And the reason, of course, is very simple. We want to make sure that if the user buys something, that they're going to get it, or at least they have the best possible chance of getting it. So your application better be really, really sure that it saved that state of that purchase before it actually confirms the notification. And then finally, the server comes back and says, all right, I got your notification response. We're all good. And again, you can add a server-side component to this really, really easily. In this case, we request the nonce from the server. We return a session. And at the very, very end, there we are. We actually do the server billing off on the server side and then validate the billing response. So this is, once again, the same exact thing we did with LVL. We're just adding that into this flow. And the important thing is this. We validate the billing response before we confirm notifications. Once again, it's very important not to confirm the notification until you absolutely know that your server has the data so that their purchase is stored. And the code on the server looks something like this. Now, admittedly, this is App Engine code. But App Engine code is just running inside of a well-known servlet container. So this is very, very straightforward. And one of the things that's nice about App Engine is that it's running Java. And so is all of the license validation code. So I was able to actually take the license validator and with no real changes, put it right into App Engine and use that code on the server side. So this is all the code that was needed to actually go and validate this transaction, which is pretty cool. And we actually implemented this all in App Engine and have a great sample that someday we'll have time to publish, but it's not hard. So before I leave you, I want to talk quickly about cloud services, because some of these are near and dear to my heart, and the cloud is becoming more connected to everything. So you saw a couple of cloud services already in terms of license validation and in-app purchase. So another one that I want to see more people use is application data backup. And if you're at my gaming session, you heard me talk about how annoying it is to play a game for hours and hours and hours and then have your data get lost because you lost your phone or because you decided to upgrade your phone. It's not a good user experience, especially since your application can get automatically restored by Android Market. So then they've got the app and their settings are all gone.